Okay, good afternoon everyone. We're here to talk about the poem Follower by Seamus Heaney from the GCSE Poetry Anthology. Now, like many of the other poems, Follower is really on the subject of a relationship between the speaker and his father. And we have, quite a bit of sort of looking back, age and kind of the difference between being a young child looking up to a father, to a parent, and like Before You Were Mine, for example, now perhaps being in the perspective of that child as an adult, kind of thinking about the father and the role the father plays in his life now. So we can, I can maybe open it up and we can talk a little bit more about how he does it.
I think looking at the real focus on the father, I love how the first two stanzas begin. So you have that really explosive, proud opening with that first person determiner there, my father. And then the second stanza begins with that inarguable sentence, an expert. I think there's no doubt at all that this narrator, at the beginning of the poem, sees this father with the utmost respect and how remarkable he is at his profession. And we also look then maybe at some of the verbs at the beginning that come from the lexical field of farming and agriculture, and we see that he's a real master who's strained, clicking his tongue. He can do these meticulous things without breaking, and all sorts of really wonderful verbs that describe this man as a bloke to be really awed or in awe with from his son.
Mm-hmm. It's really interesting that you mentioned the verbs that have those sounds like click and break. And you have the repetition of those hard-sounding letters such as K and T, and which reflect the precision of father's craft.
Yeah, definitely that kind of, I think what both of you say, in that sense of admiration and the perfection, like you're saying, with that the clicking sounds and the pluck, and I mean that's even explicitly said. I wanted to grow up and plough in the fifth stanza.
And I think the thing is as well is that there's a whole metaphor for ploughing in a way, in that Seamus Heaney is ploughing in his own way because he's ploughing words. And although he hasn't followed his family, it's similar to the poem Digging, I think, in that way, in that it's a poem about the way he hasn't become like his father, and the last stanza is very much an acceptance of that, but perhaps with some regret, that, or maybe on the part of his father, but also maybe on his part, because it's the idea that his father at the end is still following behind him, stumbling.
Yeah, I think there was that expectation, you are the son of the farmer, you carry on that name, and of course we know that Heaney went into this lifestyle of academia, and he pursued that route and became a remarkable and coming from that kind of rural part of Northern Ireland to go to university at that time was really rare. People didn't do it, and it would have been much more difficult, much more unusual for him at that time to be the first in his family to go to university than it would be for our kids, the kids that we're teaching, to go to university.
But also he's not only the first person in his family, but he's really, really good at it. Excellent.
Yes.
So I read somewhere that 30% of all the poetry that was sold in the United Kingdom at some point was actually Seamus Heaney. So, his father has achieved mastery in farming and ploughing, and Seamus Heaney seems to be following him in his steps, but his field is poetry, isn't it?
And it is strange when we talk about that, and the fact that he has achieved such mastery, yet when he talks about himself within this poem, when the narrator extends those feelings, the verb usage switches. I stumbled, I wanted to grow up and plough. Then he says in that final stanza, admittedly, that he was a nuisance. He was tripping, and falling and yapping. And there's a real guilt that comes through. I think towards the end of that poem.
Yeah,
it's interesting. It's just interesting how you have that kind of that shift of focus there from, like you were saying, Mr. Lewis, about the beginning and my father, an expert, and then it's sort of, for the second half of the poem, it focuses, then he turns the focus onto himself.
Yes.
So there's that kind of maybe what his father was, again, a little bit like Before You Were Mine, how his father was as a man, and then his kind of connection to his father, and that maybe just sort of insecurity that he shows that you might have when you look up to someone like his father.
Yeah,
But it's very much his view of what he was like as a child, because there's no sense in the poem that his father finds him irritating, because the father carries him around on his back and doesn't, he's never, doesn't seem to be gruff with him in any way. He carries on with his work, and it's interesting that it's Heaney's view that he's nuisance and yapping. And it's him looking back on himself as a child quite harshly, but there's no sense that the father did that.
I love some of the nautical imagery that comes through this, and I think it's a great one to link to Mother Any Distance with the whole anchor kite thing. But again, we get this image of this guy who's really is the captain of his ship.
Yes.
He knows down to the finest millimetre of his farm how it works, how to get the best out of it. And I love the bit as well when we talk about his team. Where's the bit about his team? His sweating team turned around and back into the land. So he's so good at his craft that he could even get these animals on side, and they're willing to respond, to please, to satisfy him in his farming endeavours. And
then he becomes like the horse himself, doesn't he?
Yeah.
And then dipping and rising is like on a sea.
As well,
animalistic with the yapping,
animalistic sort of, I'm that annoying dog or whatever, but it's all that connection to farm life.
So what do you make of that Volta then? So in the second line of the final stanza, we've got that caesura where he says he was falling, yapping always, full stop, but today, so he brings it back to the present. It is my father who keeps stumbling behind me and will not go away. What do we think about that?
I think I've said to my class that I've started to read that really differently since my dad died, because I think you read that as actually it's about your parents always being in your memory, and that he's very connected to him as a child, and that is never going to go away. And you can also read it that he is finding him difficult to look after as an old man. But I think there's also the potential meaning that we're always forever connected to our parents, even sometimes if you may not want to be. They won't go away, those memories won't go away.
I think we get that real feeling of, you touched on it there, the connections, the lines that we have for the people that have come before us.
Yes.
And he talks, quite literally about the lines that the father was so good at ploughing. And I think we often get a lot of that in Seamus Heaney's poem. There's a real strong sense of where he's come from, and who it is or what it is that's led him to feel the way that he does.
Yeah.
I think as well that linking into what you were saying about the ending and that strong relationship with our parents, because I agree. When I first read it, I kind of thought, is he kind of feeling frustrated? But then actually I think it's such a sort of sense of kind of a definite ending with that full stop, and will not go away, full stop. It's kind of putting that real emphasis on the fact that he is here to stay in my mind. He's always going to be with me.
In that way, it reminds me of Eden Falls. And I think it's unexpected to him that he feels this way about his dad. And it's same with Eden Falls, that final line where he says, I never expected it to be like this. It reminds me very much of that. You come to a point in your life where you're looking at things differently.
Yeah.
And I think, again, if we're looking at the shift in tone, lots of these poems have amazing things to talk about with the shift in tone or perspective.
Yeah.
I think this is another great one that begins in a certain way and almost pays homage to this amazing father that we have. But then we get this really ambiguous Volta, the twist that makes us really question at the end, where is it coming from? And like you said, Miss Part, I think you bring your own emotions, experiences to any poem, but with this one in particular, you can read it in so many ways, can't you?
Almost
That's
as if
why
it
it's
was a
so
shadow as well, something that will not go away. So you can read it as something good, but also something that will not go away, because he said, I was a nuisance, but today it is my father who keeps stumbling.
Yeah, so there's absolutely the implication that that his father is a nuisance. But I do think there's that thing of memory. that sometimes you don't want to remember
Maybe
things.
the memories actually
Yeah.
the nuisance,
Yeah.
not the father himself.
Well, it's like linking back to everything we've just said about context and how Seamus
Yes.
Heaney was very famous for his poetry, which was often about life, rural life,
Yeah.
growing up in Northern Ireland, and you know, it doesn't go away, that connection, the whole lexical field of farming and machinery and
Yeah.
like even within his poetry, which is his own path in life, that link to his father won't go away.
I think it's quite a nice one that you started this today, Miss Luke. We know it links a lot to your connections in Newcastle and that sort of Billy Elliot style upbringing that you often tell us about. Anyway, thank you very much for listening today. We'll see you again soon.